Good morning, everybody. This is Philippe Nassif, Executive Director of In Defense of Christians. Thank you all for joining us this morning. We've got a lot of folks that are on the phone calling in from across the country, so we're honored to have all of you guys joining us. We like to give some time to our elected officials to get on the phone or on Facebook Live or any sort of medium that we can offer to, hear from them about why they support a lot of the issues that we're advocating for here in Washington, D.C., and to hear more about what's happening in Washington, D.C. Regarding defending Christians and religious minorities across the Middle East. So today we have the honor of welcoming Congressman Raskin. Congressman, are you on the phone?
Yes, I am. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you, sir?
Very fine.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today. I know it's a little early for our friends on the West Coast, but we actually have some on the phone, which is pretty impressive. So it's nice to be joined by folks from both sides of the country. But in any case, we have many of your constituents that are on the phone, and of course we have you, so thank you for joining us.
Well, I'm delighted to be with you, and thank you for all of your guys' hard work for religious freedom.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. So I know we don't have much of your time, so we're just going to jump right into it. We've got a couple of questions that I'm going to be asking you, and then we have some questions from some of our chapter leaders that sent their questions in ahead of time from across the country, and one of them from your district specifically. So we'll go ahead and get started. First of all, thank you very much for your leadership in Congress. You've been a big supporter of a lot of our work, and we're just honored to call you a friend on Capitol Hill.
Well, I'm honored to work with you guys, and it is one of those issues, fortunately, which breaks down the paralyzing partisan conflict that has gotten so much attention. And I'm hoping not only we can make progress for people who are under the gun in different terror and torture regimes and authoritarian governments across the world, but also make progress in Washington on changing the climate. And I think that this is one issue that can really do it.
Yes, thank you so much. And I mean, on that point, you're a tireless advocate for human rights and religious freedom. You're on the Congressional International Religious Freedom Caucus, as well as many other humanitarian caucuses. And my question really is, how did you become so passionate about these issues?
Oh, gee, well, I've always been, a champion of human rights, and I'm a professor of constitutional law, which is what I've done for 27 years. And so I've been teaching basically for a quarter century about how religious freedom has been at the heart of our Bill of Rights and freedom more generally in our country. Our framers rebelled against centuries of religious warfare between Catholics and Protestants in Europe, and the Holy Inquisition and the Crusades and the witchcraft trials and so on, and stood very strong for the idea that people have to be free to worship as they please without the government getting involved, which means, of course, that you can't allow one religious sect to capture control of government and oppress all the others, which is what we see happening around the world today. So
Absolutely.
I think that, freedom of worship and freedom of conscience is absolutely central to our system of freedom of speech and expression and the kind of personal identity in the country.
Absolutely. No, thank you very much. I think all those points are spot on. And, speaking of some of the work that's done on Capitol Hill, what are some of the legislative accomplishments that are protecting religious minorities in the Middle East that you are most proud of? Maybe some that have already passed and others that may be coming up. Share with us some of those accomplishments.
Well, you guys are aware because you've been centrally involved in a lot of the accomplishments we've had over the last year. What I'm working on, and I would love to get whatever help I can from your group, is this Resolution 349, I think is our number, which is a resolution against blasphemy laws and apostasy laws and heresy laws and witchcraft and sorcery laws all over the world, which have put hundreds of people, not just Christians, but others too, but lots of Christians in prison and in jail. And so we think that America should be in the forefront of leading the opposition to such laws. I mean, Saudi Arabia is a country that's got them. Iran is a country that's got them. Bangladesh, and they're being used to persecute people kind of across the religious spectrum. And of course, we got rid of such laws a long time ago in the U.S. And it is essential to religious freedom around the world, and specifically Christian freedom in the Muslim world.
Sure. No, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we've got many of your constituents listening in, and obviously our chapters around the country, and so they'd be more than happy to help, as they have been helping on any of these legislative issues that come up that we can support. So thank you for that.
Well, that's great. And I think it's wonderful that you've organized people all across the country at the local level to be engaged in these questions. And it shows a lot of imagination and a lot of empathy on the parts of people in being involved.
No, those are kind words. Thank you. Thank you so much, Congressman. Another question, taking us all to the region itself, what do you see as the challenge facing Christian communities in the Middle East that Congress should tackle next? What is sort of the biggest sort of challenge right now? We had ISIS for a long time in Iraq and Syria. That's not entirely done for, but the persecution, both state-sponsored persecution and then by these extremist groups that you see in Syria and other parts of the region seem to be the biggest challenges. Are there any other additional challenges, or those specifically you see as the biggest issue facing Christians?
Yeah, I mean, those are certainly kind of the biggest short-term threat. But if you go back to the founders of our country, as I always like to do, you go back to Madison and George Mason and Jefferson, and the overriding challenge is for people to understand that religious freedom is only safe for anybody when it's safe for everybody. Because if it's not safe for everybody, it means that somebody can get a hold of the reins of state power and declare that somebody else is a heretic or an apostate or a witch or a threat to the state. And so really our job is to be fighting for the principle of religious freedom and toleration all over the world, which has been one of the great triumphs of the American experiment.
Absolutely. No, thank you. I mean, there's no shortage of challenges, and we've accomplished a lot, but there's a long way to go. And so I think that you're right. Well, we have several questions that were sent in to us by our advocates, and so I'm going to field a couple of those your way because I know we don't have too much more of your time. One of the questions came in actually all the way from St. Louis. In your position as a congressman, how important is the stabilization of the Middle East and North Africa and religious freedom there to you personally?
Well, I think it's very important. It's going to be hard for us to make progress on democracy and freedom and justice for all people and religious faiths in different communities if we're in a situation of constant turbulence and civil conflict and civil war and so on. So I think it's going to be critical for us to make progress on all of the problems that are boiling the waters.
Great. Thank you. And this next question is two-part, and you really answered the first part, but I'm going to ask you anyway because I think you'll enjoy the second part. But what initiative is Congress taking to stand with Christians in the Middle East? And then the second part is, it seems everything is running slow in Congress. Why? and I wanted to ask the second part because, we hear that a lot from our advocates, and obviously you do as well, in the sense that Congress has to deal with a lot that comes their way, and folks sometimes feel like it runs a little bit slowly. So my question to you, I guess, really what this constituent is asking is, how do we sort of address that?
Well, I share that frustration. Before I came to Congress, I've only been in for 1 year, but I was a state senator in Maryland for a decade, and I think a lot of my colleagues with a background in state and local government share that frustration where, you're at a level of government where things have to get done and you actually have to pass a balanced budget, and you've got to address, concerns and so on. And it does seem like we keep kicking the can down the road in Congress. And, I think it comes back to the kind of bipartisan deadlock that we're in. And my thinking about that is, look, obviously our system runs on competitive partisan elections, and that's great. We should be able to fight like cats and dogs during the campaigns and the elections. But once we're in, then the Congress is the Congress, and we should try to act together as a whole as much as possible. But things have broken down so much, we don't even really have hearings on bills. I mean, my resolution against the anti-blasphemy and anti-heresy laws has never even gotten a hearing. And we're voting on major legislation that's never had a hearing. And so that's a problem, because the main thing that Congress should be doing is listening to people and trying to assemble as much evidence as possible. And that obviously, goes right to the question of the situation of Christians and other, affected minorities in the Middle East.
Right. Thank you, Congressman. Congressman, I have two more quick questions for you, if that's okay. One was sent in from another constituent of yours on Lebanon, and it was specifically asking about the refugee crisis in Lebanon and the strain that it's put on the Lebanese government in terms of resources and the economic impact it's had writ large on the Lebanese population. There's a little more than a third of the population of Lebanon is now refugees, mostly from Syria. So what roles are you playing to help support the Lebanese government, maybe creating safe zones in Syria so some of these refugees can return home? What are some of sort of the initiatives right now? I know you and I met not long ago on House Resolution 252, which addresses this very issue.
Yes.
But tell us a little bit more about what else is happening.
Well, yeah, I was going to invoke 252, which is, what I know about most. It does attempt to relieve the refugee pressure on Lebanon through the creation of safe zones and kind of an international approach to dealing with the flood of refugees there. And I think we obviously need to see leadership from the State Department and the Trump administration on moving that whole question. But, there are large parts of the world that are suffering terrible immigration and refugee crises. And, another one, of course, is in Yemen now, where I think we're seeing a real humanitarian disaster because of the civil war that's taking place in that country. Right.
Thank you. Final question here. What can the United States and USAID actually become involved in the direct rebuilding of destroyed churches, considering the separation of church and state here in the United States? I would like to see that happen. This is actually coming from a priest of ours, a good friend of the organization and an advocate from Kansas. Again, he's asking about, can the USAID actually become involved in the rebuilding of a lot of the churches, specifically in northern Iraq, where a lot of them were destroyed by ISIS and parts of Syria?
Well, that's an interesting question. I had not thought of that. I mean, constitutionally, of course, we cannot establish a religion. However, there's definitely certain forms of government aid that go to churches, like police services, fire services, water and sewer and so on. And that's, domestically. And I imagine as long as it doesn't take place on a denomination-specific basis and it's part of a general program of social reconstruction in war-torn zones,
right.
That includes other private entities, so there's not a public-private distinction, then the cases like Zellman would come into play, which say that, we can have school vouchers in America that go to private schools as long as it's not just religious schools, but, that parents could use them at all private schools. I think there might be a problem if the aid goes directly to the church, but if it goes to, say, a rebuilding fund that then uses it for different purposes, including rebuilding important private or historic landmarks, then that might be possible. But again, that's off the top of my head.
Right. No, thank you. That's very helpful. It's something that's near and dear to the hearts of a lot of the advocates. So thank you for addressing that question and for all of these questions. And of course, thank you so much for your time joining us today.
The pleasure is mine. Keep up your great work.
Absolutely. Thank you, Congressman, for standing for Christians and other religious minorities in the region. We appreciate it, and we'll see you again soon.
You bet. Bye-bye. Take
care. Bye-bye. And thank you, everybody else who joined us from across the country. This is Philippe Nassif with In Defense of Christians, and we're wishing you a blessed and wonderful day. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.